The painting revealed. The story broke like a summer thunderstorm. Sudden, loud, and impossible to ignore. By morning, art blogs and social media accounts were buzzing with headlines. The Secret Life of Alexander Chen and Art World's Bachelor revealed as family man. Alexander sat in the hospital room, scrolling through his phone as Elena slept. The medication had worked. Their baby was safe for now. Outside, a security guard kept vigil against persistent photographers. His phone lit up with Vanessa's call for the 20th time. Finally, he answered. "The damage control starts now," she said without preamble. "We're spinning this as a recent development. You met her 6 months ago, whirlwind romance, private ceremony." "No," Alexander interrupted. "We've been married for 4 years. Silence stretched between them before Vanessa spoke again, her voice tightly controlled. "Do you understand what this does to everything we've built? The mystique, the narrative?" "I'm done hiding my life to sell paintings," Alexander said. "Elena deserves better." "It's not just about selling paintings," Vanessa countered. "It's about your legacy. The Rothman exhibition opens in 2 weeks. Jonathan is furious about being blindsided. Then I'll talk to him. He's considering postponing the show." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. The exhibition represented years of work, his most ambitious collection yet. "He can't do that." "He can and he might," Vanessa said. "Unless we manage this situation. The press is already digging. Someone leaked that Elena works at the Met. They're piecing together your timeline." After ending the call, Alexander gazed at Elena's sleeping form. How had protecting their relationship turned into something that needed damage control? A text from Sophia arrived. "Have you seen this?" She'd attached a link to an art blog. Alexander clicked it open to find a photograph of a painting, his painting of Elena, the private one he kept hidden in his studio. The caption read, "Exclusive, Chen's secret masterpiece of pregnant wife discovered by source close to the artist." Alexander's blood ran cold. Someone had been in his studio, photographed his most intimate work, and sold it to the press. Only a handful of people had access to that space. When Elena woke an hour later, Alexander was pacing by the window. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately sensing his tension. He showed her the article. Elena's eyes widened as she saw her own image staring back. "How did they get this?" "Someone betrayed us," Alexander said. "Someone who had access." Elena studied the photo more carefully. "The corner of the canvas. There's a red paint smudge that wasn't there before." Alexander zoomed in on the detail. She was right. The painting had been handled recently and not carefully. "Marcus," he said, the name bitter on his tongue. Marcus Delacroix, his former assistant and now rising star in his own right, had always resented living in Alexander's shadow. "Would he really do this?" Elena asked. Before Alexander could answer, his phone rang again. This time it was Jonathan Rothman himself. "That painting in the tabloids," Jonathan said without greeting. "I want it for the exhibition." "It's not for sale," Alexander replied immediately. "It's private." "It's the most authentic work you've ever created," Jonathan argued. "It would transform the exhibition from merely excellent to extraordinary." "I said no." "Then perhaps we should reconsider the exhibition entirely." The threat hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Alexander looked at Elena, who was watching him intently. "I need to think about it," he finally said. After ending the call, he explained the situation to Elena. "Use the painting," she said simply. "What?" "No, that's our private life." "You've hidden me away for 4 years," Elena said, her voice gaining strength. "Maybe it's time I was part of your world completely. If that painting helps, use it." Alexander sat on the edge of her bed. "Are you sure?" "On one condition," she said. "No more secrets. No more separation between your art life and our life together. I won't be kept in the shadows anymore." Alexander nodded slowly. No more shadows. That evening, when the hospital corridor quieted, Alexander set up his travel easel beside Elena's bed. As she slept, he began to paint. Not the empty landscapes he was known for, but the full, complex reality of his life. Elena, the hospital room, the monitors tracking their child's heartbeat. It was messy, imperfect, and entirely true. Canvas of truth 1 week before the exhibition, Alexander helped Elena through the front door of their brownstone. The doctors had released her under strict orders of bed rest until her due date. She leaned heavily on his arm, exhaustion evident in her face, but determination in her eyes. "Home at last," she sighed, as Alexander guided her to the bedroom they'd prepared for both mother and coming child. Their house had transformed in the days since the news broke. The peaceful sanctuary they'd created was now under siege. Photographers occasionally gathered outside. Art world gossip swirled around them, and Alexander's phone buzzed constantly with messages from journalists, collectors and critics, all wanting the real story. After settling Elena, Alexander went to his studio. The space felt violated after Marcus's betrayal. The painting of Elena was now at the Rothman Gallery, being prepared for exhibition against his initial wishes. He'd fired Marcus after confronting him about the leak. The younger artist had shown no remorse, merely shrugged and said, "Art shouldn't be hidden away. Neither should the truth." Alexander's phone rang. It was Diane Lee, the most influential art critic at the New York Times. "I'd like to interview you before the opening," she said. The art world is fascinated by this revelation. "It completely recontextualizes your work." Alexander hesitated. Interviews had always been Vanessa's domain, with carefully crafted responses and strategic omissions. "I'll need to discuss it with my wife," he said, the phrase still foreign on his tongue in professional contexts. "Perfect. I'd like to interview both of you, actually. How your relationship has influenced your creative process. Why you kept it hidden." After ending the call, Alexander sat before his latest canvas, the hospital scene he'd begun painting at Elena's bedside. It wasn't like his other work. It was raw, immediate, filled with the tension and tenderness of those fearful hours. "You should do the interview," Elena said from the doorway, wrapped in a robe, leaning against the frame for support. Alexander turned. "You should be resting." "I've been resting for days," she said, carefully making her way to the couch in his studio. "And avoiding the problem won't make it disappear." Alexander joined her on the couch. "I don't know what to tell them. The truth makes me look shallow and cowardly." Elena took his hand. "Then tell them a different truth. Not why you hid me, but why you painted what you painted. How your art and life have always been connected, even when you pretended they weren't." Alexander considered this. "My empty landscapes were never really empty," Elena finished. "They were about absence, longing, the spaces between people." As they sat together, Alexander's phone lit up with a text from Jonathan Rothman. "Coming by in an hour with final exhibition layout for approval." Alexander showed Elena the message. "Are you up for this?" She nodded. "It's time I met the man who's been exhibiting my husband's soul for years." When Jonathan arrived, he was clearly uncomfortable entering their home, this space that represented the reality he hadn't known existed. His eyes widened slightly at seeing Elena in person. "Mrs. Chen," he said formally, extending his hand. "Elena, please," she replied, her smile genuine but reserved. The three sat in the living room as Jonathan spread out the exhibition plans on the coffee table. "We've restructured the entire concept," Jonathan explained. "Instead of solitary vision, we're calling it hidden worlds." Alexander studied the layout. His landscapes were still the centerpiece, but Jonathan had created a narrative progression through the gallery, culminating in the painting of Elena, now titled simply, "Wife." "You've rewritten my entire body of work," Alexander said, a hint of anger in his voice. "I've contextualized it," Jonathan corrected. "The isolation in your landscapes wasn't philosophical, it was biographical. You were painting the divide between your public and private selves." Elena leaned forward with effort. "He's right, Alexander." Both men turned to her in surprise. "Your Coastal Horizon series," she continued. "You painted those the year we decided to keep our marriage private. The division between sky and sea, always with that impenetrable line between them. Two worlds that never quite touch." Alexander stared at his wife, seeing her anew, not just as his partner, but as someone who understood his work perhaps better than he did himself. Jonathan cleared his throat. There's something else. We'd like to include the hospital painting. Alexander shook his head. It's not finished. That's precisely why it's perfect, Jonathan insisted. It shows the artist in transition, from hidden to revealed, from isolation to connection. Elena squeezed Alexander's hand. Show them who you really are. That night, after Jonathan left, Alexander returned to his studio. He stared at the hospital painting, seeing it with fresh eyes. It wasn't just documentation of a medical emergency. It was the moment his separated worlds had finally, irreversibly collided. He picked up his brush and began to work, painting through the night. When morning light filtered through the windows, Elena found him still at the canvas, exhausted but clear-eyed. It's finished, he said simply. Separate worlds. Alexander Chen stood before the blank canvas, paintbrush suspended in mid-air. The soft morning light filtered through the tall windows of his Manhattan studio, illuminating specks of dust dancing in the air. At 38, he had achieved what most artists only dreamed of: critical acclaim, financial success, and the freedom to create without compromise. Yet the canvas before him remained untouched, much like the truth he kept hidden from the art world that adored him. You should tell them before the exhibition, Elena said softly, her accent still carrying traces of her Barcelona childhood. She stood in the doorway, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other holding a mug of herbal tea. Alexander lowered his brush. I will. After the Rothman Gallery opening. The timing isn't right. Elena sighed, approaching him with careful steps. At 32, she moved with grace, despite being 7 months pregnant. You've been saying that for 3 years, mi amor. First it was after your first solo show, then after the Whitney Commission, now it's the Rothman exhibition. She was right. Their relationship had become New York's best-kept secret. Alexander Chen, the darling of contemporary art, celebrated bachelor and mysterious figure who rejected the social circuit in favor of seclusion, secretly married for 4 years to Elena Vega, a brilliant art conservator at the Metropolitan Museum. This exhibition is everything I've worked for, Alexander said, setting his palette down. Jonathan Rothman is putting his reputation on the line, featuring my new series. The narrative they've built around me, the solitary artist dedicated only to his craft, it sells. The moment they discover I'm married, with a baby on the way, they'll know you're human? Elena challenged, her deep brown eyes fixing him with that penetrating gaze that had captured him the moment they met in the museum's conservation lab. Alexander crossed the room, taking her hands in his. The art world is fickle. They want the mystique, the story. Alexander Chen, who channels his isolation into haunting landscapes. Not Alexander Chen, who paints between changing diapers? Elena pulled away, her expression hardening. So I am what? A liability to your brand? No, Alexander said quickly. Never that. But my agent, Vanessa only cares about commissions, Elena interrupted. And I'm tired of being your secret, Alexander. I'm tired of attending your openings as a friend. I'm tired of watching women flirt with you while I stand across the room, pretending not to care. And now, she gestured to her belly, how do you plan to hide this? The truth hung between them. While Elena's pregnancy had filled their brownstone with joy, it had also accelerated the inevitable collision of Alexander's carefully separated worlds. The exhibition opens in 3 weeks, he said, touching her cheek. After that, I promise we'll make an announcement. The right way. His phone buzzed with Vanessa's familiar ringtone. Elena's shoulders fell as Alexander reached for it. I have to take this. The gallery always needs something, Elena murmured, turning away. I'm going to my mother's today. She at least is excited about her grandchild. As Elena left the studio, Alexander answered the call. Morning, Vanessa. Alex, darling, we've got incredible news. His agent's voice bubbled through the speaker. Jonathan wants to host a pre-exhibition dinner at his Hamptons estate this weekend. All the major critics, collectors, museum directors, everyone who matters will be there. Alexander watched Elena's shadow disappear down the hallway. Everyone who matters, he echoed. This is it, Alex. The moment we've been building toward. The Solitary Vision series is going to cement your legacy. Nothing can distract from this moment. Keep focused. Stay mysterious. Be the Alexander Chen they're all fascinated by. After ending the call, Alexander returned to the blank canvas. Behind it, covered by a sheet, stood another painting, one the world would never see. He pulled away the fabric to reveal Elena, radiant in early pregnancy, her expression a complex blend of love and uncertainty. It was his finest work, and the one he kept hidden from the world. Retry UB Part 2 to 3-Edit Part 2. The Unexpected Announcement. The Rothman Gallery's pre-exhibition dinner buzzed with New York's elite. Crystal glasses clinked against the backdrop of hushed conversations about acquisitions and artistic legacies. Alexander stood near the bay windows overlooking the Atlantic, nursing a glass of scotch as Jonathan Rothman paraded him before potential collectors. Alexander captures emptiness like no one else, Jonathan was saying to a jewelry-laden woman whose name Alexander had already forgotten. His work speaks to our collective solitude. Alexander smiled tightly, the irony not lost on him. 300 miles away, Elena was attending her baby shower, surrounded by friends who knew the truth. His phone vibrated in his pocket. The fifth text from Elena's best friend, Sophia. "If you'll excuse me," Alexander said, slipping away from the conversation. In the quiet of the hallway, he read Sophia's message. Elena's water broke. "We're at Mount Sinai. She's asking for you." His heart pounded. It was too early, nearly 7 weeks before the due date. He texted back immediately, hands shaking. "On my way." As Alexander rushed toward the front entrance, Vanessa intercepted him, her scarlet dress matching her lipstick perfectly. "Where are you going?" "The Guggenheim director just arrived." "Family emergency," Alexander said without thinking. Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. "Family? I wasn't aware you had any family in New York." Before he could respond, his phone rang. Sophia again. He answered, forgetting where he was. "How is she?" "Is the baby?" "The doctors are with her now." Sophia's voice was tight with worry. "They're concerned about premature labor. They've called a specialist." "Alexander, she's scared." "Tell her I'm coming. I'm leaving now." Jonathan Rothman appeared beside Vanessa, concern etched on his face. "Is everything all right, Alexander?" Alexander looked between them, the two architects of his career, and made a decision. "My wife is in labor. It's too early. I need to go." The word wife fell into the hallway like a dropped glass. Vanessa's expression froze. "Wife!" Jonathan repeated, confusion evident. "I'll explain later," Alexander said, already moving toward the door. Vanessa followed him outside. "You're married?" "Since when?" "Alexander, this changes everything about how we've positioned you. Not now." "Vanessa. The press release describes you as untethered by conventional relationships. We've built your entire brand on—" Alexander turned on her, a flash of anger cutting through his worry. "My wife might be losing our baby. I don't give a damn about my brand right now." He left Vanessa standing on the marble steps, her mouth agape, and sped toward the city. The hospital corridor seemed endless as Alexander ran, directed by a nurse toward the maternity ward. When he finally reached the right floor, he heard Elena's name being announced over the loudspeaker. "Dr. Kaplan to Labor and Delivery Suite 4, patient Elena Vega Chen." At the nurse's station, he identified himself breathlessly. "I'm Alexander Chen, my wife, Elena." "Mr. Chen," a nurse acknowledged, recognition flickering across her face. "Your wife is stabilized. Dr. Kaplan has administered medication to stop the contractions." Relief washed through him as he was led to Elena's room. She lay pale against the white sheets, monitors beeping steadily around her. Sophia sat beside her, holding her hand. "You came," Elena whispered as he approached. "Of course I came," Alexander said, taking her other hand and kissing it. "I'm so sorry I wasn't with you." Sophia quietly excused herself, squeezing Elena's shoulder as she left. "The baby?" Alexander asked softly. "Still safe," Elena said, placing his hand on her belly. "The doctor says I need complete bed rest until delivery." "No work, no stress." Alexander nodded, overwhelmed with guilt and relief. Whatever you need. I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. Elena's eyes filled with tears. But your exhibition doesn't matter, he said firmly. None of it matters. A soft knock interrupted them. A nurse entered, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Chen? There are some reporters in the lobby asking about you and Ms. Vega Chen. Hospital security is keeping them at bay, but... Alexander's stomach dropped. He checked his phone to find 6 missed calls from Vanessa and 1 text. It's already on social media. Reclusive artist Alexander Chen rushes from Hamptons to NYC hospital for secret wife. Call me immediately. Elena read his expression. They know. Alexander nodded slowly. They know. What will you do? She asked, her voice small. Alexander looked at his wife, at the monitors tracking their unborn child's heartbeat, and felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. I'm going to tell the truth, he said. All of it. The Exhibition of Life. The night of the exhibition opening arrived with the electric anticipation that accompanied major art world events. Limousines lined the street outside the Rothman Gallery, disgorging celebrities, collectors, and critics into the warm spring evening. Camera flashes punctuated the darkness like lightning. Inside, Alexander adjusted his tie, standing alone in Jonathan's office. Through the door, he could hear the growing murmur of the crowd. Vanessa entered, elegant in black, her expression professional but distant. Their relationship had cooled considerably since the revelation. Full house, she said. Every major publication sent someone. Alexander nodded. And Elena? Your sister just texted. They're 5 minutes away, with Elena still on bed rest. Alexander had arranged for his sister May to accompany her to the opening, ensuring she wouldn't navigate the crowd alone. The Times piece helped, Vanessa continued, referring to Diane Lee's interview. The article had been surprisingly sympathetic, portraying Alexander not as deceptive but as protective, and Elena as his muse and intellectual partner rather than a secret to be ashamed of. People love a love story, Vanessa added, a hint of her old warmth returning, even in the cynical art world. When Alexander stepped into the main gallery, conversation momentarily hushed before resuming with increased intensity. He moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions with a new openness that felt simultaneously vulnerable and liberating. The exhibition design was masterful. Visitors began with his earliest landscapes, stark minimalist scenes that had established his reputation. As they progressed, subtle elements of human presence began to appear. A distant figure on a beach, an abandoned cup on a table, the shadow of someone just outside the frame. Then came the paintings from the years of his marriage to Elena. Works the world had interpreted as explorations of solitude, now revealed as meditations on separation and duality. Beside each piece, alongside Alexander's original artist statement, hung a new addendum describing the personal context of its creation. Halfway through the exhibition, Alexander spotted Elena entering, radiant in a flowing dress that accommodated her pregnancy, her arm linked through May's. The crowd parted instinctively, whispers following in their wake. Alexander crossed the room to meet them, taking Elena's hand publicly proudly. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, and together they walked through the remainder of the exhibition, past paintings that charted their hidden relationship. Critics and collectors watched this intimate tour with fascination, observing the artist and his muse engaging with the documented history of their love. Finally, they reached the culminating room, where 3 paintings hung on walls of their own. The first was Wife, the intimate portrait of Elena that Marcus had exposed to the world. Seeing it in the gallery, illuminated by perfect lighting, Alexander was struck by how different it looked from when it hung covered in his studio. More vibrant, more alive. The second was the hospital painting, titled Emergency. Several visitors stood before it, some openly moved to tears by its raw emotion and technical mastery. Alexander had completed it the night after Jonathan's visit, working through dawn to capture the precarious balance of fear and hope that had defined those hours, but it was the third painting that drew the most Attention, a piece Alexander had created, in secret over the past week, unveiled only hours before the opening. Titled simply Family, it showed Elena and Alexander in their home, the space between them occupied by a crib, empty but waiting. Light streamed through windows onto walls adorned with smaller versions of Alexander's landscapes. The painting placed his art within the context of their shared life, rather than as an escape from it. Jonathan appeared at Alexander's elbow, champagne flutes in hand. "You've outdone yourself," he said, offering the glasses. "Non-alcoholic for Elena, of course." As they accepted the drinks, Diane Lee approached with her notepad. "The final painting wasn't part of our interview," she said. "Care to comment on its inclusion?" Alexander looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. "It's the first painting of my new life," Alexander explained. "Not about what was or what is, but what will be." Later, as the evening wound down, Alexander and Elena found a moment alone in front of family. Most guests had departed for the after-party at a nearby hotel, an event Elena's condition prevented them from attending. "What happens now?" Elena asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "When the excitement fades and the art world moves on to its next sensation?" Alexander placed his hand on her belly, feeling the gentle movement of their child. "Now we live," he said simply. "No more hiding parts of ourselves. No more separate studios and separate lives." "And your art?" Alexander smiled. "My landscapes might have a few more people in them." As they prepared to leave, Marcus Delacroix approached, champagne glass in hand. His exhibition across town had apparently ended early. "Quite the redemption story," he said, gesturing around the gallery. "From secretive recluse to family man. The critics are eating it up." "It's not a story," Alexander replied evenly. "It's my life," Marcus shrugged. "Either way, I did you a favor." Elena stepped forward, one protective hand on her belly. "You betrayed a trust for your own gain." "And look at the result," Marcus countered. "Bigger crowds, better reviews, probably higher prices. The painting I exposed is the centerpiece of this entire show." Alexander regarded his former assistant calmly. "You're right. The painting belongs here. But that wasn't your decision to make." As Marcus opened his mouth to respond, Elena suddenly gasped, clutching Alexander's arm. "What's wrong?" Alexander asked, instantly alert. Elena's face broke into a surprised smile. "Nothing's wrong, but I think someone's ready to make their debut." Understanding dawned on Alexander's face as Elena placed his hand on her belly, where strong, decisive kicks could be felt. Marcus backed away awkwardly as Jonathan hurried over with concern. "Should I call an ambulance?" Jonathan asked, phone already in hand. Elena laughed. "No need, the baby's just very active." Apparently they're an art lover already. As they left the gallery, photographers captured what would become the exhibition's most memorable image: Alexander and Elena framed in the doorway, his arm protectively around her, both bathed in the gallery lights as they stepped together into the spring night. In the weeks that followed, critics would call Hidden Worlds a watershed moment in Alexander's career, the point where his art transcended technical mastery to achieve genuine emotional resonance. Collectors would compete fiercely for pieces from the exhibition, particularly the final trilogy. But for Alexander and Elena, that night marked a simpler, more profound transformation, the moment when art ceased to be a barrier between worlds and became instead a bridge connecting them. When their daughter was born a month later, healthy, despite the earlier scare, Alexander painted her with the same honesty and vulnerability that had transformed his work. This painting, unlike the others, would never hang in a gallery or sell at auction. It would remain where it belonged, in their home, at the center of the family that had become his greatest masterpiece.